Occupy Central protests that began in Admiralty yesterday have spilled over to several other areas, such as Causeway Bay and Mongkok. Scores of people were rallying in those areas early this morning. And as the day progressed, more joined in, packing out some main roads completely. Some MTR exits at Admiralty, Central and Causeway Bay stations remain closed. Chief Secretary for Administration Carrie Lam has stood by the police over the way they've handled protesters and appealed for demonstrators to remain calm and peaceful. She also said the government will launch the second round of the political reform consultation at a more appropriate time. And the National Day fireworks displayed at Victoria Harbour, originally scheduled for Wednesday evening that is, has been cancelled due to concerns about public safety and transport. The occupation at Admiralty, Mongkok and Causeway Bay grew this afternoon. Although the police sent out negotiators in an attempt to get protesters off the roads, they were unsuccessful. The police also defended their use of tear gas last night. Stephanie Choi reports.
The number of protesters gathered at Admiralty began to climb this afternoon. For these children, Admiralty became a classroom for civic education.
My kids asking me what happened when they watching the TV. They saw the student was run away because of tear gas. Then they say, is it the student being naughty? So the policeman punished them. That's why I bring them here this morning. Yeah, I just let them to see the real situation here.
Protesters later filed into Wan Chai for more space. The police sent out negotiators to Admiralty, Causeway Bay and Mongkok to get protesters off the roads so that normal traffic can resume. Not only were they unsuccessful, protesters blamed the police for pushing them out onto the streets. At the gathering in Mongkok, this student told us that a little bit of peaceful disruption for the sake of the future of Hong Kong would be worth it.
I was actually reading reports about protesters in Hong Kong Island cleaning up tear gas canisters that the police had thrown on them. There's been no looting so far as I've heard. I think you can see like people are just here to show how they feel.
One of the Occupy Central organizers advised caution to participants of the movement.
Everyone has to be alert, given the experience yesterday. No one, I guess, in Hong Kong have ever imagined that a peaceful demonstration will be cracked down in this way.
But the police insisted that last night's use of tear gas was necessary.
The police cordon lines were heavily charged by some protesters, by some violent protesters. So police had to use the minimum force in order to separate the distance at that moment between the protesters and also the police. Police use force not only subject to the guidelines, but also we have to consider whether there are any other alternatives. That's why we will give them warning. They can retreat.
For now, members of the public are showing support for the demonstrators by delivering daily essentials such as food and water to them. Stephanie Choi, TVB News.
Ronnie Samtani and Evelina Leung have been following the demonstrations on the streets in Admiralty and Causeway Bay. Ronnie, what's the situation like there now?
Hi, Chris. This evening, people have continued to flock to the protest area here in Wan Chai. Right now, a sea of protesters has filled Harcourt Road. And as more people are arriving, demonstrators have been urged to move down towards Wan Chai. The crowd stretches all the way from Gloucester Road in Wan Chai through Admiralty and then all the way to the Mandarin Oriental Hotel in Central. The atmosphere here is pretty calm. Occasionally, people have been chanting slogans, singing songs, cheering and clapping. This morning, demonstrators were very peaceful and there were no reported clashes between police and the protesters. In fact, the police presence here is a lot less than it was yesterday. It is unknown if any further action will be taken to try to clear protesters tonight, but many of the people out here seem prepared with goggles, towels and masks. Evelina Leung is standing by in Causeway Bay, one of the other areas that is now filled with ralliers. Over to you, Evelina.
Hi, Rani. Hi, Chris and Sonia. Well, I'm standing here on Yiwon Street, right outside the Sogo department store. Well, as you can see, the street is full of protesters. This street has been closed off since last night when the protesters began staging their sit-in here. Let's talk a bit about the protesters. The protesters have been very peaceful. They're simply sitting here, chatting to each other, cheering each other on. And it doesn't seem like they're going away anytime soon. Members of the public who are not here have been showing their support for the protesters by bringing them food and water supply. And just a quick note, there is not much of a police presence here. From where I am standing, I don't see any police officers at all. Well, that's all from me. Back to you in the studio.
And that's Evelina Long from the streets of Causeway Bay. Now, the protests have also caused traffic disruption with the suspension of dozens of bus routes. Some banks and shops were also affected. Liz Yoon has more.
In Mongkok, some banks were closed today. Some people only realized that the banks were not operating after they arrived there. This man said this was inconvenient and that he had to return to the office with unfinished business. This shopkeeper said he expects a 50% drop in sales because the blockade prevents customers from stopping by. On Hong Kong Island, Admiralty Centre, not far from the central government offices, today deployed more security guards than usual to man the building. This fast food restaurant was shut down today because of a lack of supplies caused by traffic problems. This man heading to work said the company he works for has adopted flexible arrangements. Still, most of my colleagues are at work, he said, and the protests have not affected the firm's operations. Over in Central, banks, real estate agencies, and car showrooms were affected. And some shops here in Causeway Bay were closed. Some shops and eateries posted notices on their doors which say that they're not opening due to an emergency. Even this newspaper stall is now closed. In public transport, more than 50 bus routes were suspended. Bus companies sent staff members to help direct passengers. Throughout the day, certain exits at the Admiralty, Central and Causeway Bay MTR stations were closed. Liz Yun, TVB News.
Chief Secretary for Administration Carrie Lam said today the government is very concerned about the present situation. She said that she does see the sincerity of the protesters in wanting a better future for Hong Kong, but the administration will wait for a better atmosphere in society before launching the second round of public consultation on political reform.
We have to monitor the situation closely and find the right timing, the right opportunity, the right atmosphere for us to engage with different stakeholders in society in order to achieve the objective of the second round consultation. The objective of the second round public consultation is to adhere to the framework as laid down by the National People's Congress Standing Committee, but to fill in the very important details about the electoral arrangements for the selection of the chief executive. And I think it is far more constructive for us to undertake this important piece of work when we have settled down for a while the sentiments that we are now seeing in society.
Teachers and students of some secondary schools today heeded the call by Hong Kong's largest teachers union for a class and teaching boycott. But as Diane To reports, the Education Bureau expressed regret about the announcement by the Professional Teachers Union.
These are students of Po Leung Kuk Vicwood KT Chong Sixth Form College who gathered in the school's gymnasium this morning for the boycott. The school said it had arranged teachers to look after the students there. A number of teachers have also taken up the call by the Professional Teachers Union to join the boycott starting today. The lawmaker representing the education sector stressed that teachers taking action aren't abandoning students.
For teachers, we are very clear that we are angry. We are angry at what the government has done to the students, to the citizens. And these kind of things are unacceptable. And so we do this thing. We boycott class. And we made proper arrangements so that the students are being taken care very carefully. and also expressed our anger.
He also accused Secretary for Education Eddie Ng of threatening protesting teachers with follow-up action. In a statement, the Education Bureau expressed its deepest regrets over the call by the PTU to launch the boycott. The Bureau says it sincerely urges all teachers to uphold professionalism in their own position and make every effort to take care of the students so that their normal schooling can be free from any interference. It also said several other school councils and bodies are against the boycott by secondary school teachers and students. Classes of all kindergartens as well as primary, secondary and special schools in the Wan Chai and Central and Western districts were suspended today because of traffic disruption. Schools still had to stay open though and arranged for teachers to look after students who had arrived. As for students in other districts who arrived late or were absent, the Education Bureau called on schools to take traffic problems into consideration. It also reminded parents and students to make safety the first priority. Diane To, TVB News.
Pan-Democratic lawmakers have released a joint statement condemning the police for using excessive force against protesters while demanding the chief executive step down. The lawmakers proposed to hold an emergency meeting to review the police's response to the protests. They also want to draft a motion of impeachment against the chief executive. Owen Fung reports.
No NPC decision! No NPC decision!
27 pan-democratic legislators have signed a joint statement in response to the events yesterday.
The people of Hong Kong merely demanded a dialogue, but the chief executive responded by tear gas. We strongly condemn the Hong Kong SAR government, who had used disproportionate force on peaceful demonstrators.
Some legislators also praised the protesters.
The Hong Kong people, particularly the students, have demonstrated to the whole world how the Hong Kong people would fight for democracy, human rights, with dignity, with restraint.
The demonstrators, the students, the Occupy Central movement had successfully turned a new page for the civic movement in Hong Kong.
The statement demands that Leung Chun-ying steps down as chief executive. It also calls on the National People's Congress Standing Committee to retract the political reform framework issued last month and restart the consultation process from scratch. Later on in the day, the pan-democratic legislators met with LegCo President Tang Yuk-sing to call for a special emergency meeting before the first meeting of a new LegCo session to discuss the police's handling of the protests. They also said they're drafting a motion of impeachment against the chief executive. Meanwhile, Robert Chow, spokesman for the Alliance for Peace and Democracy, has urged the protesters in Mong Kok and Causeway Bay to return those areas to ordinary citizens. He also warns that public opinion could turn against the protesters if they inconvenience the public for too long. Owen Fung, TVB News.